I'm Teo.
I'm Sworup.
And today we are talking about philosophy.
Yeah.
So Sworup, tell me, does this exist?
Yeah.
How does it exist? What is it made of? How do you know?
So it really depends on who you ask. As you know, that's like the classic response to anything complicated. I think it depends. So it really depends on who you ask, and there are various schools of thought, and even within these schools of thought, you have various streams of thought, and each of them would answer this differently. And I don't think we can get into like all of them and the nitty-gritty details of everything, but philosophy has always been a central part of Indian tradition, but it's not been the same as the Western tradition, I think, because you read any of these philosophical texts, any sutra, any karika, any of these shastras, then they're always concerned with moksha, or liberation, or how to get rid of suffering. They always begin with, we need to get rid of suffering, and in order to do that, you need to know blah 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 blah, and then they start explaining stuff, and I think that's very interesting. And also, I think it is Georges Dreyfus that makes this point: is the entirety of like South Asian philosophy, Indian, Tibetan, etc., has always been of like a commentarial tradition where you have like somebody you consider authoritative, and then somebody sort of critiques them, someone from another school, and then you try within your own system of thought to defend it. Mm-hmm. So it's not usually where you have a set definition set across the board, where it's just you're arguing on the logic part of it. A lot of the arguments are actually based on which definition you take, and then redefining that to fit into or answer criticism is usually how philosophy works. And I think you have to start when discussing Indian or South Asian philosophy in general is with the Nyaya school, right? Mm-hmm. So the Nyaya school, together with kind of its cousin, you could say, Vaisheshika, sort of forms like the initial backdrop for many of the things that we take for granted within Indian thought. So I'll just begin with Vaisheshika's principal text, which is the Vaisheshika Sutra by Kannada. And, he always... he begins by saying, okay, well, the main goal of life is liberation. Moksha is what we want to go after, and to get moksha, you have to understand everything almost. That's usually how it goes within the Indian. You have to understand everything to get liberated.
I mean, this isn't necessarily different from in kind from something like Plato's investigation into the good life. In the Western tradition too, there's the sense that if you want liberation, or if you want to live a good life, or if you have this set of ethical concerns, then you should just think really hard about it, and you can kind of think your way to whatever the good life is.
I mean, Plato goes as far as to say, the ideal state is a state ruled by philosophers.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I guess that's what the Indian school would also say.
Manusmriti, the ideal state is the state ruled by Brahmins.
So the Vaisheshika Sutra of Kannada, the fourth verse, because usually the verses before that are homage verses, dedicatory verses about liberation, etc., which we already talked about. So the fourth sutra goes, the true knowledge of shared and differing properties of ontological categories. So Vaisheshika deals with categories. Comes from Vishesha, where you want to find out something sort of that separates something. So they do this thing. So they have ontological categories generated by particular attributes of those padarthas. It lists out the padarthas. And the padarthas are, it says, dravya, guna, karma, samanya, vishesha, and samavaya, which dravya is substance, which we can translate as substance.
So these padarthas, what we're working with is they're laying out what they think is the basic stuff of
Basic,
existence.
the basic categories of what make reality up, the building blocks of reality, let's say. So dravya is substance, is very similar to Aristotelian substance. And the categories might, remind you of Aristotelian categories too.
They might remind somebody of Aristotelian categories, not me.
So dravya is substance in that sense. Guna is quality.
Okay.
And karma is activity.
Okay.
Right. Karma is like, I raise my hand, that's like a karma. A balloon inflates, that's a karma. Something like that. So we have quality, you have substance, we have action, we have samanya, which is generality.
Okay.
So these are things that make things general. So this is a mic and that is a mic. These both belong to this general category of mic. Right.
So like a concept.
Yeah, like a
broad
concept.
general
Yeah.
concept.
So that's samanya, and vishesha is particular. So this is a particular mic that's not that particular mic. So that's vishesha. I think we might, a lot of philosophical arguments within India come from this samanya and vishesha categories, especially with Buddhism. And samavaya is inherence.
Okay.
So inherence, how do I mean inherence or togetherness? In the sense that, so all dravyas have a guna. They can perform a karma. They belong to a general category and they are special somethings, So all these properties somehow inhere. So a substance has the inherence of these qualities.
Oh, or like a coherence, a concurrence.
Yeah,
every time you get this dravya, you'll get this karma.
Yeah.
Like an association between different ontological basic
not
things.
exactly every time, but they are related. So it's saying that these are all sort of descriptors of, mental categories. These aren't like physical categories. These are mental categories of stuff. And so we go into immediately what are dravyas. So there are 9 dravyas. The classic 5 elements, that is Prithvi, Apa, Teja, Vayu, Akasha, which is earth, water, fire, air, and it's very difficult to translate. Ether.
Space.
Yeah, it's so difficult because if you translate Akasha as space, then there's another one that comes later called Dik. Which is also kind of space, but then it's like a measurement-ish description of space. So you have the 5 elements. You have Kala, which is time. So that's a dravya. You have Dik, which is directional sort of space, if we can put it in that sense. We have Atma, which is kind of the self, the soul. And we have Mana, which is the mind, right? And so these are the 9 dravyas that Vaisheshika lays out.
What do we mean by a dravya or a substance? Like when we're saying that time is a substance, are we saying that we can grab it, that we can touch it? What is the use of dravya?
So dravya doesn't mean tangible in that sense. It doesn't mean something that we can touch. Dravyas can be experiential. So these are things that usually cause experience.
Okay.
Right. So
this is the common phenomenon you see throughout Indian philosophy is the benchmark for something to be real, to exist, is to be causally efficacious.
Yeah.
If it can do something to you, if it can perform a karma, then it's substantial. It has a substance, even if you can't grab it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So these are the dravyas. Okay. Very classic. It lays down 9 of these, and and Vaisheshika and Nyaya, most of Hindu schools, let's say, consider many of these dravyas to be real in the sense that, in the opposition to ideal sort of philosophical stance. So real as in you don't need. Like they exist out there, it's not like they're in your mind or they're in your brain or whatever. These are substances that are out there.
It doesn't matter if you're perceiving them.
Yeah,
multiple people can have shared experience of that same thing.
So it's kind of a realism in that sense. Okay. And then it lays out what gunas have. So form or color is a guna, right? Taste, order, touch, number, measure, distinctiveness, conjunction, disjunction, so some 2 things coming together, 2 things being apart. Paratva is otherness. Otherness is I mean, the easiest way to explain is that you are an other to me, right?
So if dravyas are, we can the grammar analogy, if dravyas are nouns, then gunas are adjectives. Describing words, qualities.
The qualities. And they actually possess these qualities.
Okay.
So apa actually has a quality associated with it. So aparatva is the opposite, being so not otherness. So oneness, like not in a sense of oneness, but then one's ownness. We have intellect, which we have to be very careful with, which is not the mind as mana. That's a dravya. We have sukha, dukha, etc. So all of these feelings, etc., are all gunas.
Okay.
So these gunas are, let's say, to a sensory person, these gunas are the experiential side of the dravyas. So they lay out this. Then what's karma? Karma is movement upwards, movement downwards, contraction, expansion, and movement from one place to the other place. So it says these are karmas. So then you get the idea of moving upwards and downwards, because it's not really like just a physical upwards, and it's a spiritual upwards and downwards, where you can move upwards towards higher lokas and downwards because of karma. So it's not really related to just action as in movement, as in I take my hand and I move it from this place to this place.
In some way it means like just any sort of causal effect, any sort of change, any action, intentional action.
And it gives the features of karma, and this becomes a little bit of a talking point, where a karma resides in a dravya at a time. So a specific karma can reside in a dravya at a time. So your dravya can't be doing, can't be having two karmas at the same time, let's say. Devoid of guna. So karma is devoid of guna. So karma, the action itself, is not guna. So that's why you get the initial categories into the padarthas. These are kind of exclusive mentally, but then you don't really find them in exclusivity in experience. So mentally you can distinguish them. The unbiased independent cause of conjunction and disjunction, so the bringing together or bringing stuff apart. These are the features of karma, it says. So karma is something that can reside in the dravya at one time, devoid of guna. So it doesn't have guna on its own. And it clarifies in Vaisheshika's verses 21 to 23. It says karma is not a cause of dravya. Which is pretty strong, because now what that comes into argument later on, I guess, with many of the other schools, where there's no cause to these dravyas. So karma is not a cause of dravya. And it says because karma is explicitly excluded from them, right? Because karma is excluded from the dravyas, right? It's not part of the dravya system. It's not a cause of dravya, because something that's totally not related to something, you can't cause it, etc., etc.
Okay. So now we have an idea that substantial things are permanent. That they're basically unchanging. They're eternal. Dravya has always been here. Space has always been there. It's always existed. Okay.
Yeah. And then gives this one strong claim that being is the cause of continuity, is samanya, or so the thingness or the beingness of something is the samanya. So a particular shade of red, like I'm wearing black, you're wearing black, they share in a kind of blackness. Similar to Plato again. Yeah. Right, with his everything good participates in the form of good. So these are sort of how Nyaya views the world. This is how Vaisheshika views the world.
For clarity, maybe we should talk about this bottle in particular. So could you break down this bottle for me?
Okay.
Based on how a Nyaya would look at it.
Yeah, so this bottle is a thing that exists.
It's a thing that exists.
It's a thing that exists. And it's a thing that is possessed of, first of all, dravyas. Okay. So it's made up of the conjunction of 5 elements. Okay. Right.
All 5 or some of the 5?
So now here's the thing. Now this is a topic of debate as well, right? So it's either it's not purely sort of but just Prithvi. right? Because Prithvi, in some sense, it's not really talking about earth as soil. It's really a rigidity it's what it's getting at. And I can feel it, and it's cold, right? And that suggests, later on we come and it says Apa has the nature of coolness, all right, where Teja has the quality or guna of like heat, right? Air has fluidity. So if there was no air in this, none of the things in this bottle could ever move.
So when we're talking about Prithvi, we're not really talking about any earth that we could ever touch or see.
Yeah.
We're talking about some sort of like distant, perfect, ideal earth that we
something-
only ever encounter in combination with other
in
stuff.
combination with other things, yes. But again, Vaisheshika is insistent that there is like some anu of Prithvi.
Yes, it's not ideal.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
it's there.
It's there.
Yeah.
So it's not ideal. So in philosophically, mental state ideal, but it's there. So
So it has gunas too. It's a gunan.
it has gunas. So Prithvi has Prithvi has these things that Prithvi gives its color. It gives color, so it's blue. There's taste. So If I taste, if I lick it, I get some taste, right? So it's because of Prithvi. It has a smell, right? And I can sort of, it gives me a response when I touch. So these are the qualities of Prithvi.
Help me understand too how Dik and Kala work into it.
So Dik would be, so this is in some position is in space.
Okay.
Right. So this is not really space as in ether, because that is kind of it's like what the other dravyas inhere in. Okay. So it's like that sort of thing. Dik is like a particularization of this thing in space.
Okay, so it's localized in space.
Localized, yeah.
It's localized in time.
And it's localized in time. Okay. So that's Dik and Kala, right? Atma and Mana, this is a jada object. So it's not like you have to have the 9 dravyas everywhere. Okay. So this is the jada object. This
does not have a soul. It does not have a self. It does not have a mind.
Yeah. But
it would be very uncomfortable with you licking it.
And then one of them gets. So then it says Apa is that has color, taste, touch, which is fluid and smooth. So that's Apa. That's water. Teja as fire, it just as color and touch.
Okay.
Right. So these are the qualities that it can provide.
Okay.
Let's say. Vayu is touchable. So I can just touch Vayu. I can't see Vayu.
Okay.
Right. So it doesn't have color. That's why we can't see it. And none of these gunas are present in Akasha. So you can't really touch, feel, taste space. So the Akasha is this kind of this abstract entity in that sense. So this is how it lays down sort of the ontological basis of reality, right? And now what Nyaya does is, and Vaisheshika does is, it lays down a very strong sense of self. And the way it lays down the sense of self is very simple. And it appeals to sort of just common experience. It says, this is verse 146, where it says, if the perception I am Devadatta, right, and I am Yagyadatta is seen, as in, I am Sworup, I feel it. I know, like, there's some part of me that's like, that knows that I am Sworup, and that's the most prataksha you can ever have in terms of that's the most directly perceptible experience I have. So what other proof do you need? Why do you need to infer yourself?
And this is important too, because in India generally, you don't have 5 senses, you have 6 senses.
Yeah, 6.
So your mind understanding something, that's equivalent to a sensory experience. Your mind is like directly interacting with that.
Interacting with
that's perception.
Yeah. And your mind directly is interacting with, and it's giving you this idea that there is Sworup. I am Sworup. And what other proof do you need of something like the Atma or the self? You have direct perception of it. And that's how Vaisheshikas and Nyayas, they sort of establish this idea of the self as being.
So if I can summarize the dravyas before we move on to the self. So the philosophical problem at hand is that there's infinite amounts of things, and they're all different.
Yeah.
Some things we can only smell, some things we can taste, some things we can smell and taste, but we can't touch. And the explanation that they're offering is, well, there's actually not an infinite amount of stuff.
Yeah.
There's only 9 things.
Yeah.
But based on their sort of combination, that's where you get this variety of experience, where it feels like things are very different, where you feel, okay.
Exactly.
So now we're trying to explain with that framework, the self.
The self, right. So the self is immediately sort of perceptible. That's why it's there. And it lays down some other core ideas, like, so it says perception, as in pratyaksha, experience, is only possible of objects of magnitude. So now you can explain, why can't I experience Prithvi as the atom or the anu of Prithvi? Why can't I experience it? Because it's imperceptible, because it doesn't have magnitude. You need magnitude in order you need some sort of sizable sort of thing for it to and this is what's important, I think, is when we say atom within the Nyaya Vaisheshika system, we don't mean the atom of science, where even though it's small, it has size and everything. The Vaisheshikas are insistent on the idea that they are infinitely small, like they have no magnitude, right? So then you can prompt the question, well, how do we ever experience anything then? Right, if they're so small, right? And the Vaisheshikas give the answer is that these atoms will form kind of like binaries and ternaries, where they are sort of connected or joined in a binary system. So you can one atom with another atom, and then or 3 atoms, and then it forms a ternary, and that is theoretically perceptible. Okay, as in, it might not be perceptible to you because your senses are flawed. They have like a magnitude of limit, that they can see, that they can feel, etc., etc. But to a yogi, let's say, that could be perceptible. Okay, right.
So we're building up something analogous to chemistry almost. Yeah. Right. Atoms can interact. They can make molecules. Yeah. And molecules are now open to perception and open to action in the world. Yeah, in the way that atoms are not. Yeah. Atoms are just tiny little dots.
Tiny little dots. Yeah. And then it gives this very strong claim that these gunas, right, that I spelled, this form, etc., etc., taste, all of these are nitya in the dravya. So they're sort of always there, right? So you can't separate. So this is their quality. This is what they are almost.
So there's nothing you could do to this bottle. Yeah. You couldn't, even if you cut it up into the smallest possible piece, there would still be blueness in it somehow. Yeah. Blueness is inherent in the bottle.
Right. And then we go back, because we are always dealing with liberation, right? So, okay, this is the ontology of everything, right? The only reason you suffer is because you don't know how all of these things are working. You sort of superimpose something else upon them, and then, then you cause yourself suffering in this sense because of ignorance. And the Vaisheshikas are very clear that ignorance results from the dosha of the organs of sense, as in your sense organs are at fault. So they're not perfect. They can't sense the thing perfectly. Right.
A dosha being like a fault, a flaw.
Yeah. So your sense organs themselves are flawed, right? But also there's the dosha of samskara, which is previous sort of ideas that you've collected, previous experiences that you've had. So now, because I've seen blue previously, it's sort of a samskara in my sort of psycho apparatus. So the next time I see blue, right, I sort of see it through that filter of the blueness that I already know about.
Or even analogously, trauma would be sort of a samskara.
Yeah,
if I've been bitten by a snake a million times and I see a rope on the street, my samskara, my mental formations are very likely to make my perception do the dosha of thinking that's a snake, of perceiving a snake when there is no snake.
So that is where ignorance comes from. It comes from these doshas, right? Avidya is sort of imperfect cognition, therefore. So ignorance is imperfect cognition. And knowledge is the opposite. So it's perfect knowledge, right? So perfect cognition of stuff. And this results in dharma. Okay, so the knowledge of stuff as they actually are results in dharma. Okay. So that's how the Vaisheshika lays down its ontology and a little bit of its epistemology. So the Vaisheshika school is more known for its ontology than its epistemology, and its sister or cousin school, let's say Nyaya, is more known for its epistemology. But then, even though they have differences, they're usually grouped together because they're usually dealing with sort of the same ideas. And
I guess for the sake of definition, ontology being the study of being, epistemology being the study of knowledge. How do you know what you know? And those are inevitably intertwined in any philosophical system, because if I tell you, oh, there's actually these infinite atoms, you have to explain to me, well, how do you know that if you can't see them? Yeah.
So, and that becomes very much more potent later on, I think, with other schools coming in. So the Nyaya Sutras are what I want to go into of Gautama. So it lays down the epistemology. So it gives a very foundational. The knowledge sources, or the valid sources of knowledge, are perception, prataksha. Inference is anumana.
And pratyaksha, just breaking it down grammatically, prati has that sense of right before something. Right you're there, seeing it, exactly. It's right in front of you.
We'll come to that, what it means by perception. Analogy, which is upamana, which is sort of similarity. So a cow and a bull are similar, but then, you could explain like a male and a female human is similar to a cow and a bull. So that's kind of an analogy, right? And then that's a source of knowledge. And testimony, valid testimony from authoritative sources.
An authoritative source being...
so now an authoritative source is a source that you can trust, right? That, can explain reality properly to you, etc., etc. So,
but for the Nyaya Vaisheshika, who is it?
So it's mostly the Vedas or seers, gurus, rishis, these would be authoritative sources.
Okay.
So now it defines exactly what perception is. It says, perceptual knowledge arises from a connection of sense faculties, so the sense of touch that I can have in my sort of fingers, or let's say, and object, so I'm touching this radio, and does not depend on language, so I don't have to conceive that this is a radio, right? So I'm not reading something in my mind saying, oh, this is a radio.
Or also, I guess what that's trying to stop is someone could tell you something, and you've experienced that by someone untrustworthy could tell you something, and you're experiencing that by hearing, and you could say, oh, well, that's direct perception because it's hearing, and they say, no, you haven't heard. Hearing an explosion is direct perception, but hearing words that involves language, that's exactly. Not direct.
That's not, and then it does not depend on language, is inerrant. So prataksha is by definition inerrant. You cannot have an errant prataksha, and is definitive, as in it's not vague. So it's not like if I see something at a very far distance and I don't really see what it is, it could be a car, it could be a truck, I don't really know, it's very far away, then that would not be a valid source of knowledge.
Because that's not a perfect connection.
And these are, it lays down what prataksha is. Then it goes to inference, right? Inference is that which depends on previous perception. So inference has perception as like a basis for it, and is threefold. It's three types of inference. From something prior, this is a priori inference, right? From something later, that is a posteriori inference, and then through the experience of common characteristic. And I can give an example that's commonly given when explaining this is, so if I have seen dark clouds in the sky before and it rained, right? And so now I see dark clouds on the sky, I can, before it rains, I can infer that it will rain. So a priori, just because I see the dark clouds, I will infer that it will rain. So that's a form of inference. Second is a posteriori, which is, okay, I've been inside in my sort of room for a long time. I have no idea what's going on outside. But I go outside and the floor is wet, let's say, or the ground is wet. Then I can say, okay, I knew from previous experience that whenever it rains, the ground gets wet. So from the fact that the ground is wet, I can infer the previous fact that it rained, right? So that's a posteriori inference. And then you have common experience, which is experience of common characteristics is kind of like if I have always seen fire and smoke, then I can infer smoke from fire. So it's like a common thing that we encounter all the time, and therefore it holds as a source of knowledge. So inference is a valid source of knowledge according to the Nyaya. Analogy is knowledge produced through similarity with something familiar. So you don't really know the exact thing, but then you can kind of figure out through analogy. So like the example of the cow and the bull with man and woman, you could say that cow and the bull is like man and woman, right? This is a cow, this is a bull. The bull is like the man, the cow is like the woman, and therefore you can infer some characteristics, or you can figure out some characteristics through the way of analogy.
An analogy usually depends on gunas. You're picking out a particular quality, you're picking
exactly.
out gender, and you're saying these two animals possess gender just like humans possess gender, and therefore a cow is to a bull as a woman is to a man.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's analogy, right? And then the final source of knowledge is valid testimony. Which is the talk of seers, of trustworthy people who have not lied. And one of the main criteria is who have also directly experienced them.
Okay.
So they have to be trustworthy is fine, but they can't be giving off hearsay. So you can't give off hearsay. It has to be sort of authoritative in that sense.
Which is why it's so appropriate that Rishi is often translated as seer.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
The person who actually directly experiences.
Yeah.
Seers never use analogy, seers never use inference. Seers have a direct perception, and that's why they're authoritative.
And then it gives a final sort of a nice thing that tarka is reasoning that proceeds by considering what is consistent with knowledge sources. So tarka is reasoning, right, which comes by considering valid knowledge sources in order to know the truth about something that we don't definitively know about. So you can use, it's kind of an inference, right? It's kind of a...
Or something like scientific reasoning, something like
rational
thought.
sort of thought. So Nyaya is very insistent on these things. And the Nyaya Vaisheshika schools kind of go hand in hand with their ontology and their epistemology. That these things exist and these are how we know them. So atoms are there, the atoms form ternaries, and then we can feel them, prataksha, we can feel rigidity, solidity. So it's really tied to experience, right? And inference is built up on perception, so therefore, you get like an ascending sort of, ontology and epistemology sort of go up this ladder of, okay, these are the basic things that exist, but they can mix together and form this, which is solid, and also you can feel that it has color and touch and so on. So therefore you can know things.
And there's a possibility to it. It's very clear about rightness and wrongness.
Yeah.
If you touch this and you feel it's hard and I feel it's soft, we haven't had a different experience.
Yeah.
I have had a wrong experience.
Yeah.
My sense faculties are broken, or I didn't use them in the right way. I didn't touch the right thing, and so I'm just wrong.
Yeah.
So they have this whole system for establishing what things are, how they exist. How do they apply that to the self? How are they proving? What are they saying about the self now?
So the self in most of these is direct perception, like I said, right? So it's directly perceiving this. And now what happens in these systems is that the self is the experiencer of this phenomena. So it's kind of like the stuff out there cause sort of feelings or thoughts or volitions to appear in something, and that something that experiences this is the self, and the self is blatantly obvious. I am Sworup, I am Devadatta, right? I have that direct perception, and therefore there is no fault in that. Later schools will sort of criticize this notion pretty sharply, and then the Nyayas will have to respond. And that's what Vatsyayana, for example, or Jatakas, they do, is they respond to these criticisms by saying, well, the self is the experiencer, right? And it's directly perceptible, and it's this conscious principle, and all your pramanas that you're trying to disprove us are dependent on a cognizer. You can't. So who's the pramanas for? Who's
A pramana being an authoritative source of knowledge.
Yeah, source of knowledge. And if you sort of throw away the idea of conscious, these pramanas require a cognizer to sort of cognize this thing as being valid or invalid. So they respond later on in this sense. So this is kind of the classical Hindu school. Within the Buddhist tradition of the Pali tradition, let's say. you get differences. You get differences, you get pretty sharp differences. So I just read one discourse from the Majjhima Nikaya, which are the middle-length suttas from the Sutta Pitaka. And here Sariputta is giving this talk. And he says friends and so on. So he starts off, what is the noble truth of suffering? Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair, etc. are all suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. And the 5 aggregates are affected by this because they are clinging, and that's why they're clinging onto this thing, and then they're suffering. And what are the 5 aggregates? The 5 aggregates affected by clinging, they are the material form aggregate affected by clinging, the feeling affected by clinging, perception. So all of these khandhas are affected by clinging. Now it says, well, what is material form then? Sariputta goes on. And then he says, okay, the material form aggregate is formed by the 4 great elements. So now we have 4, we don't have 5. Akasha is not within the Pali tradition.
Okay.
All right. Up until much later Buddhism also, until you get into tantric theory, and you don't get this akasha being like a thing that exists. And what are the 4 great elements, says Sariputta? It says they are the earth element, water element, fire, air.
But so what we're concerned with now, I mean, to clarify a little bit of this framing, is that insofar as Buddhists are concerned with suffering, they want to say, all suffering is basically attachment. It's attachment to things. And so then what remains for them is to say, well, first of all, what is it that you're attached to? What is out there? That's why they're interested in ontology. That's why they're interested in being. They want to be able to tell you accurately what's out there. And then insofar as they want to tell you how not to suffer, they have to tell you that what's out there, what seems to be out there, isn't really out there. And so you can't grab it, you can't touch it, you can't be attached to it, and you can't have all these negative ethical repercussions that come from that.
Within the Pali tradition, it's the clinging part that you want to cut off. Okay, it's the clinging part. So then Sariputta goes on, what friends is the earth element? And he says the earth element may be either internal or external, right? What is the internal earth element? He says whatever internally belonging to oneself is solid, solidified, clung to, that is hairs, body hair, teeth, nails, skin, flesh, sinew, bone. It goes on this list of...
Buddhists are famous for their long list of disgusting bodily fluids. Again, intended to make you stop clinging to your own body, to your own...
Kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, and just blah, blah, blah. This is sort of the internal earth element. And the external earth element would be sort of stuff outside, so not yours, per se. And the important part is here. Now, there comes a time when the water element is disturbed. So in Buddhist cosmology, there will come a time when the water element is disturbed and the external earth element vanishes. So it disappears. We get an immediate sort of counter sort of side to the dravyas of the Nyaya system, which is these elements are permanent and always existing. So the Buddhists are keen to say that they are not permanent in that sense. And it says
karma has affected them.
Affected them. And the point of explaining this is the earth element vanishes, and you sort of meditate on this and you say, when even this great external earth element, as great it is impermanent, right? Subject to destruction, disappearance, and change. What of this body which is clung to craving and so on? So that is also impermanent, etc., etc. So why do you cling on to these ideas of me and mine and I am and he is and etc., etc.?
With the argument being too that clinging is just as impermanent and kind of silly. You like one thing one day, you like another thing one day. You know, everything about your experience is sort of transitory.
So that's one sort of... So you get that. And it goes on by talking about water in the same way, right? Water, again, is sort of the blood that's flowing, etc., etc. And then you get air and you get fire too, right? And that's how sort of Sariputta explains this. So we get the idea that it's not denying that these elements are there. It's just denying the permanence of them. right?
And this becomes the big splitting issue between these two schools, because the Nyaya Vaisheshikas are invested in an eternal Veda.
Yeah, exactly.
That's always existed, that's always been there. A big part of the Dravya system is really founded in that.
Yeah.
That's why direct experience can be authoritative, because we need to have direct experience with an impermanent Veda.
Yeah.
Insofar as, with a permanent
Veda.
Veda. Insofar as this is all about impermanence, your ontology is going to be different. You're going to think about stuff in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. And now you get the list of the elements in other places. The Digha Nikaya, the Samgiti Sutta is famous, for it goes on this list. So one of everything. So if there's one of something, it's listed in that list. And there's two of something, it's listed there. It's three of something, it's listed. So within the four category, or the category of fours, it says the four elements are earth, fire, air. Right, so they are there. It's not like they don't exist within the Buddhist system. It's just that they're not reified to the degree of impermanent, unchanging, sort of that sort of thing. Now, but then what is there? The Buddha says, and what is it because that the wise in the world agree upon as existing, which I too say exists. So this is from the Samyutta Nikaya. Form that is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change, this the wise in the world agree upon as existing, which I too say exists. So it's not immediately idealistic in this sense of, everything is, nothing exists or everything is illusion. Stuff exists outside, but it's just impermanent. It's not like what you think it is.
It's just changeable. It's just not as simple as the Nyaya Vaisheshikas are making it out to be.
And but then, so if there is that, then what else is there? What about nirvana is the question, or nibbana? And to this, there's a very famous Udana passage from the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is famous for causing controversy among Buddhist thought, etc., etc. Depends on how you interpret it. But I'll just give you a short line. So the Buddha is in Savatthi, in Jatakas wood, and he wants to give a talk on emancipation, and he says, there is monks an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. So there is this thing that is not born.
Sounds like a dravya.
Unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. If monks, there were not that unborn. So he wants to refer to Nibbana. That's what the people would say, obviously. If monks, they were not that unborn, unbecome, unborn, unmade, unconditioned, we could not be knowing escape from this thing that is made, born, conditioned, etc., etc. So, but because there is that unborn, unconditioned, unmade nibbana, therefore emancipation is available to us, so that it's possible. So the early Buddhist schools are very confusing. And it's not clear. And even in scholarship, I don't think, like we talked about, there's not much scholarship on this either. And it's not very sort of definitively clear on what sort of is the position of the Buddha on many things, right? In the Pali tradition, at least. And, the idea of existence is something that, or permanently existing, these sort of words the Buddha generally avoids, especially in the Noble Silence, the 10 questions that the Buddha will not answer. Stuff related to this existence, is it permanent? A lot of these things. So the Buddha says everything is changing, yes, but then there are certain things that within the Pali tradition it's not worth discussing because it doesn't lead to emancipation.
So this is then an interesting standard that's introduced, and it's a nice place for us to end off, that when we're talking about being, if we're talking about being, we start the conversation talking about whether or not stuff is actually there. And the longer you go, the longer you have the philosophical argumentation, the longer you talk about it, the more you're really interested in saying this is important to think about or this isn't important to think about, which is why the Buddha's standard in that passage for Nibbana, of course, Nibbana has to be unchanging. Why? Because we need it to be real. Yeah. Why do we need it to be real? Because we really care about it, right? Because there's a sort of ethical compulsion we have in our system of thought wherein we want to reach for that thing. We don't want to reach for the earth element. The earth element won't get us anywhere. We want to be able to reach to Nibbana. And so even though we say that we're talking like scientists, right? We're putting our microscope to reality and we're breaking everything down with a scientific method. In fact, what we're doing is that we're creating ways of seeing the world that are directly tied to how we want to live or how we think other people should live.
And this goes on in later on, the same idea of perception and all of this, where the self of the Nyaya is also criticized on the same grounds within the Kathavattu, for example, where it says, okay, well, if your self is truly existent, are the feelings it feels truly existent?
Yeah.
And then it goes down this ladder of, well, feelings and then all the pancha khandas, right? Feeling, volition, consciousness, etc., etc. And then it just says, well, you can't have all of these being ultimately existing and permanent and so on, and known as an ultimate fact. And so the early Pali tradition, I think, is very concerned with change, and it wants to claim that you can't have this unchanging self, unchanging things, even, right? That they're subject to change, but it's very much in the favor of stuff being out there, I think. But it just doesn't reify them.
Yeah, and as you said, they're interested in the clinging part.
Yeah.
Don't cling to them.
Don't cling to them.
That'll hurt you. That's what's getting in your way. But as far as whether or not we can really pull our microscope out and see things, that's a question that they're agnostic on for the most part. Yeah.
So, I guess that's the early philosophical traditions, the earliest ones is that.
And as we'll see, the next 2 millennia, we're grappling with those definitions.
Exactly, and the vagueness of them and the problems with them, and the 2,000 years of Indian thought is just trying to figure these things out. So yeah.
Well, we'll have 2 more episodes, so hopefully we can get through this 2,000 years.
So yeah, I guess that's it.